CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore cutting-edge wellness from credible sources. And I'm really excited for today's episode as we join child psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders from the Institute of Living, Hartford Healthcare. We're talking about boundaries with our kids, what to share and what not to share. I think we could all use a little guideline, and we probably remember things that our parents shared with us that we wish they would not have. So thank you for being with us, Doctor.
Thank you for having me, Kara.
First of all, why are boundaries with our kids so important? And this could be confusing to people because I think we're in a generation now where it's much more about share and care and tell your kids so much more, but we can go too far.
We can go too far. And, you know, certainly sharing and caring are beautiful concepts, but boundaries are really important. So let's define what boundaries are. Boundaries are rules or guidelines, right? Rules or guidelines about what is or isn't acceptable. Boundaries often reflect your values. And so it really helps promote a child's emotional growth, helps them build confidence, and can really teach them some essential life skills.
Yeah, and some things like, I don't mean to out my mom, but let's just talk about like a fifth grade. I remember going to Cedar Point and my mom being like, should I get a divorce? And I'm thinking like, should I be the one helping you with this? I mean, she was a single mom. We were very close, but sometimes we shouldn't be sharing things with our kids. Is that right?
Right. So, that's a funny anecdote because if I asked you to remember 10 things from fifth grade, you probably couldn't come up with any of them, but that one, right? Because that you realized at that age, you know, what was that, 11, you know, how significant that statement was, that was a lot of pressure on you, and for a monumental life decision, right? So that's why you remember it. And so, right. I mean, if I hear a parent say, oh, I tell my children everything, I sort of cringe a little bit because you shouldn't be telling your children everything. There should be some boundaries or some barriers or some guidelines between what you keep, between adults and what you share with your children. And obviously, we always take a developmental perspective on this. Yeah. What you share with like elementary school age children might be different than what you share with middle school or high school children.
Okay, so let's stay on the topic of divorce because I know it affects so many families right now. Lots of people trying to navigate this. Details of adult relationship problems. This is where we set a boundary. We don't ever want to share negative opinions about the other parent.
So this is the way that I frame it for parents in these situations. And this is not just for parents separating and divorcing. This is just maybe for parents who are going through a period of conflict, but, you know, will remain married. Your child sees themselves as two halves of each parent, right? I mean, they might not consciously see it this way, but that's how they emotionally interpret it. They are two halves. So if parent A is bad-mouthing parent B, essentially what you're doing is that child's going to interpret those negative statements that you're making about parent B and internalize them. Right. So you're saying parent B has done this and they're lousy and they're, you know, all these things are cheating, lying, whatever else. The child internalizes that. And then they start to, God forbid, identify with some of those aspects of that other parent as well. And this is a process that happens over years. It's not like, you know, you have a bad day and you said something bad about the other parent. So you have to remember that when you badmouth another parent, you're essentially saying those things to your children and they internalize that.
Interesting. So let's just say someone, you know, I have a friend who's going through divorce now and the partner has some mental health problems, or, you know, maybe someone's got struggles with addiction and they're maybe not being negative, but being truthful of like, oh, you know, parent B, your father really has some serious mental health problems and he can't be trusted right now. That's not something maybe we should say to someone? I'm saying like a teenager, or do you think the teenager's going to think, oh gosh, that might be my gene pool too? Or how do we navigate that to be honest, but not overwhelming?
So I actually thought the way you said that was good, which is, you know, parent B is going through some significant struggles right now, and you can even, identify, they're going through significant depression, or they seem to have a mood disorder, or they're struggling with substance issues, right? That's a description of what they're going through. That's not they're lousy, they're terrible, they're cheating, they're lying, they're all these other negative pejorative things.
Okay,
So
so you
that's
can
a
be honest about a
description.
diagnosis. Okay.
Yeah, that's a description of what they're going through. And I mean, I would always say in that situation, and if at any point my child, my adolescent is struggling with things, I would hope that you could talk to one of us, and we will support you. My concern is that parent B didn't get help when they were younger, and so now they're having to deal with it as an adult. Right. So you could weave lessons in there, right? Treat things earlier, not later. Turning to substances as a way to solve your self-esteem or mood or anxiety is not a healthy way to deal. You can weave lessons in there, but it's the real negative and pejorative words that I worry that kids internalize, which is more damaging.
Okay, and also, what about our own personal insecurities or excessive self-doubt, or maybe even our own childhood trauma? If you went through something as a kid, should we share that with our kids? Obviously not our 5-year-old, but if they're old enough to understand trauma, do we say, oh yeah, that happened to me, or this, so-and-so? I mean, how much do we share?
So I admit that I have a generational bias on some of this, which is, I think sharing less in some of these circumstances is better. So we can take trauma, we can take substance use, we can take, any number of different things. And I admit that this is kind of a generational bias, right? My parents didn't really share anything with me. I navigated a lot of this stuff, and my brothers and sisters navigated a lot of this stuff on our own. I mean, they were there for guidance, but I think that's very generational. And as you started at the top of this segment saying, parents these days just share everything. And so maybe there's something in between those two. So, saying that, oh yes, I had sexual abuse when I was young. I worry that that's a burden for a young person that they don't know what to do with. Now it might be different to an older teenager. And again, when we're talking young adults, that's even slightly different, because now these are young adults and maybe they're living on their own, or they finished college and they're in a slightly different place. But going through a lot of your kind of trauma can really have like a secondary negative effect on your children as well.
Okay. Let me go a little deeper. If your child is going through that themselves, God forbid, something happened where they had a sexual abuse incident in college or something like that, do you then say, it happened to me and this is, I want to get you help? Or if it's somehow helpful to them, or is it still better to keep it at arm's length?
So you hit the nail on the head. That's the guideline right there. Am I sharing this because I believe it is beneficial to my child? And the example you're giving is a young adult, right? At college age or young adult. Am I sharing this because I need to unload it and unburden myself? Or am I sharing this because I believe that it could be helpful for my young adult? That's what the difference is, right? So when you're bad-mouthing a parent, or when you're unloading your own trauma, that's for your own issues, right? If you're doing it to say, I'm so sorry to hear that happened to you. I did have this experience when I was in college as well, and this is how I handled it, just to give a little kind of frame of reference, but then not going into all the nitty-gritty details. And, and then I spiraled into substance use. And then I had a whole run of really bad sexual relations, right? That kind of details. Again, that's you sharing, or the individual sharing for their own benefit, not to necessarily help their teen or young adult.
Okay, so keep that in mind. Are you doing this to be empathic, to try and help your child, and you're sharing pertinent details that are relevant to them, or are you unloading? Because isn't that called parentifying our kids, when we kind of, oh, what do I do about this? Or, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed because, I can't pay the bills this month, or something. If we parentify our kids like that, sharing our problems, what happens to them? Why is that damaging?
So that's another great term. So when you talk about that term parentify, so I see things from what we call like a systemic model, right? So in a system, in a family system, right, you have the parents kind of on this level, and then you have, one or two parents, and then you have the children on this level, right? When you parentify someone, you are essentially bringing the child up to the parental level, meaning that they have access to the information and decision making ability that the parents have. So when you parentify someone, you are giving them a tremendous amount of responsibility and emotional burden. So that is really where the difficulty comes in parentifying someone is you're giving them responsibility and emotional burden. And for the most part, they don't have the control or the ability to manage things in the way that an adult should. Now, there's a difference between, we don't need to say that, I can afford everything, because I know I can't, right? There's times I need to say, that's not in my budget right now, or that's not in my top 3 priority for what I'm gonna, what house changes I'm going to make this year. My daughter's always wanted me to make changes to the house, right? So, that's not in my top 3 priority this year. I can share what my priorities or my guidelines, or that's not something I can afford right now, but that's different than saying, oh, I'm right on the edge of financial ruin, right? You see how that could be such a burden for a young child or an adolescent even. So it's the intentionality with which you are sharing things. It doesn't mean you can't give a guideline, like that's just not something that's in our budget right now, or that's not what we're going to plan for this year, versus we're on the verge of financial ruin, right? You can like just see and hear and feel the difference in those things.
Yeah, yeah. And teaching, we used to, I think in generations past, you just never talked about money. And now the current wisdom is talk about money, teach your kids about money, teach them how to not make the mistakes that you made, or all that. But the idea of mentioning a budget or mentioning that it's not a priority right now can teach them about the reality of money without making them feel really stressed.
Right. And the most beautiful way to learn the reality of money is to get a job, right? You get a job and then you recognize, wow, I worked for 2 hours and I made this much money, but I want a new video game that would actually I would have to work 6 or 8 hours to make this video game, right? To buy this video game, right? You recognize that, that give and take of, well, this is what I earned, but this is what I want. Those are really, really powerful lessons. Some people use chores or allowances and things like that. They have ways that young people have ways that they can save money.
Yeah.
But it's understanding the relationship between effort and costs.
Yeah. Let's go into our past mistakes. We all have them. In some ways, it was easier for us, right? Our parents didn't know so much. Like, we come home when the lights are off, I mean, now we know everything. The minute the assignment isn't turned in, you get a Power School alert. The Life 360 tells you that they're not really at the house they said they were going to. So, but do we share past mistakes with our teenagers, especially our parents going to divulge, yeah, I used to drink in high school, or yeah, I tried marijuana, or is that a bad idea?
So I'm going to go back to the guideline that we've already brought up, which is the intentionality with which you are sharing. If you are saying, yeah, I drank in high school too, or yeah, I smoked a lot of pot in high school, or whatever it is that you're sharing, are you sharing that to excuse your child's behavior and not hold them accountable? Or are you sharing it in a way to say, I made these decisions, I realized how they were not good decisions for me, and these were the negative consequences that impacted my life, and I don't want you to make some of those same mistakes. Now, I do think that most young people need to make their own mistakes. That's how they learn. They don't always learn through vicarious experiences. So it's just being very careful with the intentionality in which you are sharing, and if you're using that as a way to not hold your children accountable.
What about the reverse? There are a lot of parents now that seem to not think that marijuana is a big deal. It's legal now. And some of my teens will tell me, oh yeah, well, those parents, they just don't want them to have fentanyl, so they just buy it for them because it's healthier than drinking or something. And you're thinking, gosh, I don't want my kids experimenting. If they were experimenting, I'd want them to have something clean, but no, I don't want to. I'm thinking I would never do that. But this is the idea that parents are maybe accepting that this is the reality and we're just going to make it safer. Or what happens when you're kind of rubber stamping it in a way?
So I would really be worried about those situations, because that is, as I said, not holding your child accountable. It's not even holding yourself accountable in those situations.
Yeah.
We can certainly get into the nitty gritty of, the teenage brain and alcohol use and marijuana use, right? Because marijuana is legal and for those over 21,
Yeah.
right? And because you've had greater time in your brain development, and in your, forebrain and your ability to develop impulse control and decision-making ability. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of dangers with marijuana that are not being actively talked about in some of these discussions. And I would have a lot of concerns in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, and there's social media now, and there's all these things, so kids are getting a lot more information from various sources about how, marijuana could help with anxiety, or nicotine in those little pouches. Oh, it's not tobacco. It increases mental acuity and performance, and they're advertising them for those things. But whether or not you buy into that, either way, those advertisements are geared toward adults.
Those advertisements are geared towards adults, and as adults that have the capacity to make some of those decisions, and then deal with the consequences of those decisions. Because what people don't realize, and I'm going to go down this marijuana road for a little bit, is that really regular marijuana use causes rebound anxiety. So if you're using marijuana on a regular basis to manage anxiety, you're not recognizing the fact that it actually causes rebound anxiety. That marijuana, there's been a whole body of data and research that's come out in the last decade about it opening up pathways towards psychosis. So there's a lot of dangers with marijuana that need to be more actively addressed, as opposed to just letting it happen.
No, I appreciate you having that word out there, because, and then we'll go down the marijuana train one more time. It's also not the same pot that if you were doing this in the 80s and 90s thinking, you know what, I'm okay now. That was my understanding, about a 12% to 15% THC. Some of it now is at 70, 80, 90%. It's totally a different substance.
It's totally different. And, access to use is totally different, right? I interview teens and young adults all the time, and I ask about, alcohol use and substance use and marijuana use. And I would say, very often they'll say, oh, I don't use alcohol at all. But, they have regular and access to marijuana, to weed or pot or whatever words they're using. And that's very concerning to me. So the access is pretty free and clear for a lot of our young people.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a quick break and hear from one of our sponsors who actually talks about addiction. And we'll come back and talk about what do you do if you have a secret in your family.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit wheelerhealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
All right, we're back talking about what you could share with your kids, what you shouldn't share with your kids as far as protecting their mental health. And this episode of CURES. I'm here with Dr. Laura Saunders, who's a child psychologist, and we're talking about secrets, like family secrets. Do we share them, or at what point do you share them? And these could be really anything. Maybe mom or dad had a substance abuse problem. They went to rehab, or maybe, somebody else in the family you're not aware of was convicted of a crime. I don't know. Do we share secrets in our family with the kids?
My worry, or my guideline in a lot of those situations, is obviously age, but also does the secret or revealing the secret put a level of responsibility or blame or unnatural pressure on our young people to hold or manage this information, right? So if you're sharing a piece of information, I want parents to be clear on why they're sharing it, what their intention is in sharing it. Is this meant to really help? Yes, Uncle Johnny had some difficulties when he was a young adult and went to prison for a few years. Okay, so that's one thing. I mean, to share that, I mean, there's a line between sharing things and holding things as family secrets, right? Because family secrets really can be very toxic too. So it's sharing things, but not creating a level of emotional burden for your children. Because then it's just, they feel like they have to hold on to it, or they become parentified, and now that's just too much pressure on them. So it's really being clear about what the intentionality is.
But on the reverse, should we try and keep things from them? Like if mom or dad loses a job, do we try not to tell them about that? Or if someone in the family is going to rehab, do we try not to tell them that? Or do we share it but give limited information?
So that's probably it. It's sharing it but giving limited information. So, if they knew parent B went out to work every day, and now parent B seems to be around the house a lot, right? I mean, you don't want to pretend, oh, they're just on an extended vacation, that's going on 2 months now, because that's not truthful. But again, it's not the information, not the level of information that they can't manage. So yes, parent B has lost their job, but they're actively searching for something, and now their job is to help, is to search the websites and find themselves another job, right? So I like to kind of put it into action, not just, yes, they're going to be hanging around the house all day, driving me crazy because they're unemployed. So it's giving the information, but then talking a little bit about what some of the next steps are, but in a positive way, not they lost their job and now we're going to lose our house, right? That's a terrible burden for kids to hold on to.
Okay, let's talk about political rants or extremist views. A lot of people have a lot of things to say about what's happening in the country right now. And I would say, I think most parents want their kids to believe the way that they do, especially if they have very strong opinions. So you have it on your list of not doing political rants or extremist views. So what should we share about our views on politics with the kids?
So I know that, to your point, people are not necessarily going to agree with me on this. But when you have really, really extremist views and you're constantly sharing that, it's going to have an impact on your children, because a lot of those extremist views come with a lot of fear and instill a lot of paranoia in people. And so I don't want to put a lot of fear and paranoia in our young people when they have little to no ability to manage that. So you can say, I lean this way, or I lean this way, or these are my values, or this is what's important to me. I mean, that's something that gets imparted. But to just be careful about your extremist views, because often those extremist views are meant to scare and intimidate other people, but it has that same effect on your children as well.
Interesting, because I imagine that people who hold very extreme views would think that they're the right views and that they want to share them because they're thinking we're in an extreme situation. So if they don't maybe radicalize their kids or get them to jump on board, then that fear of like, oh, the whole country is going to HE double toothpicks in a handbasket. Like, we don't want to say things like that.
Right, because that's scaring. That scares them, right? You're promoting conspiracy theories, or you're fueling paranoia, and young people don't have any control over that. So, you can between adults, or when you're at your friend's house and just having an adult discussion, go ahead, share those views. But when you rant on and on to children, it just gives them undue burden that they have no ability to manage.
So what would be the right age where when you're saying, like, does that mean not even in front of high school students are you having your deeper political views if they happen to be pretty strong?
So I think it starts with an open dialogue. Like, what kinds of things are you hearing? I mean, hearing or seeing in social media, what sort of things do you believe? What is your position on this issue or that issue? I mean, having a more open dialogue as opposed to saying, no, this is the right thing to believe and this is what's really happening out there. It's opening it up and letting them kind of espouse their points of view or their perspective or their take on some of the values you've been sharing with them through the course of their lives, as opposed to telling them what to believe.
Gotcha. Which is kind of hard. Parents want to say, oh, no, you have to believe the truth. Or I had a grandparent in town recently. It was like, this is the truth. Bottom line is you're more saying, what do you think? Or what do you, okay. So rather than, even though.
Dialogue.
Okay. Now, why do we want our kids to grow up with clear boundaries? You say the research is pretty clear. They're way better equipped to handle life if we give them boundaries when they're young.
Yes, because the more, and again, it's the intentionality with which we do and share things, right? And so if we are inadvertently constantly burdening our children are going to feel a sense of undue burden and stress that they have no control over. So the more we can, provide a structured environment, have some boundaries. I'm not saying share nothing, but have some boundaries, be clear on why you're sharing some of the things that you're sharing. It gives your children the tools to emotionally manage some of the day-to-day decisions that they have to make in their lives, and to learn how to trust, right? So if I'm sharing a piece of information with you and you're trusting that I've thought it through or I've managed that piece of information. So there's so many underlying values that happen when you have better boundaries.
Yeah. All right. Rough guideline as we end here this episode of CURES. If it's something they don't have control over, it's best not to share, or you share in a very limited way. Ask yourself, does sharing this help my kid?
Exactly. That's a great guideline to use.
All right, Dr. Laura Saunders, thank you so much for being with us. And I know we can follow you. Remind us of your Instagram. You're starting to post some nice things.
Right. It's Dr. L. Saunders PsyD, I believe.
Okay. Right at the Institute of Living at Hartford Healthcare. If you ever need some more professional help, there's some great folks like Dr. Laura Saunders there. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Carol.
And everyone at home, if you enjoyed this episode, you can always share it. It's on every podcast platform and streaming for free, always right here on WFSB Plus and The Wax every weekday morning at 8:30 a.m. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.
CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.